Hi, I'm delighted to have Nigel Harrison on the show this week. Nigel has an extensive background in the HR analytics space, and we will discuss how HR has evolved. So, Nigel, welcome on board. Do you want to give a quick, brief overview about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me on the pod. Yeah, so I guess I've been in the HR analytics world now probably for about 15 years. Like a lot of people in this space, I think a lot of us fell into it a little bit by accident. I had a background more in finance and financial analysis, and then found myself working on some projects looking at workforce analysis, and that basically evolved into a career in HR analytics, which led to further exploration of data science in other domains such as healthcare, and then I eventually found myself back in the HR and people analytics space. I've been the head of HR analytics for a couple of large global corporations, and just very much now focused on implementation of HR technology across the globe.
Yeah, no, it's funny you mentioned people analytics. There's many names now. I think it's like talent analytics, obviously HR analytics. Everyone's got their own, saying. So I guess, this is all focused around sort of helping business HR improve the business, like how can they make informed talent decisions within the business. So as you mentioned, you've been in the industry in this area for like 15 plus years. So can you describe how HR analytics has evolved and guess any key milestones that has taken place?
Yeah. I think it's hard to point at particular milestones, but when I think back to when I started in the field, it was the conversations were often about how do we apply the same kind of scientific mindset or maybe analytical mindset that you would find in finance or marketing, and how do we apply that in HR? So how do we use similar approaches like customer segmentation? How do we apply that to the workforce and talk about segmenting employee populations? And how do we quantify return on investment for HR programs, such as learning courses, for example? We would talk a bit about like pivotal and critical roles, like how do I identify those roles within an organization that have the most impact on results ultimately. And then, oftentimes the kind of tasks we get would be to build KPIs or dashboards around those populations. There was a lot of talk about balanced scorecards, for example, as a way to kind of track and measure the success of management programs that we had running.
Yeah, no, I think also I've been doing in the recruitment for 10 plus years, and even back then, the difference then has been there was a lot before, like a lot of focus on like the HR information systems.
Yeah.
Where now and like talent management systems, and now it feels like it's moving into more obviously with the big data and predictive analytics. Seems like it's more focused around employees, like well-being, and how can you improve their experience within businesses. So I guess probably that next step, getting deeper into insights into people as that sort of time has progressed. So within that, also mentioned sort of technology advancements. How has the advancements in technology, particularly in AI and machine learning, transformed HR analytics for companies?
Well, it's, as I said, like back in the day, we were really thinking about kind of taking theoretical frameworks, right, and applying it to, a business situation, right? A theoretical framework being like, how do you calculate a return on investment, for example? Right. Mm-hmm. and using, let's say, traditional models for tackling those types of questions. What big data does for you generally in all domains as well as HR is that the whole kind of theoretical basis for what you're doing kind of disappears or becomes less important. And really what you are doing is trying to gather enough data that you can use that data to make some kind of prediction. And it doesn't really matter that you understand why it works. You only really care that it does work. So what that means in the HR space is that we don't necessarily create these kind of really elaborate taxonomy of skills and then from a theoretical basis try to figure out, if someone has certain skills, what are the next skill they might need to progress in some theoretical career. We just kind of read in the data and we make a prediction based on that data. So when you go onto Amazon, it says, you're interested in these two things. You might be interested in this also, right? Amazon doesn't know why you're interested in that other thing. It just knows you're interested in the last two things, and people who are interested in that might also be interested in this. But there's no kind of scientific reason behind it, right? There's no thought. It's just kind of a pattern. And this kind of approach is now kind of used in HR, right? Where we say, okay, people like you do these learnings. People like you who've done these learnings also like these learnings, for example. Yeah. Or, we've noticed that people with this profile do well in this job. And there's no real explanation for it, right? Necessarily. It's just a pattern. And that's really changes the way you do analytics and approach the world. But what it also means is you can then have these kind of tailored recommendations or tailored products towards a particular employee. So the kind of analytics you might have done before that were really for managers, and so managers can make decisions about the workforce, these type of recommendations can now be done en masse at the individual level and given directly to the individual or the employee as a recommendation. Here's a learning for you. Here's a job you should think about, etc.
Yeah. No, I think also definitely it's going to get. I guess that's what AI does. It gives you that personalization, and this is obviously giving that personalized. This could be the right path for you. Gives you I guess you a bit of guidance and advice how other people have progressed as well. So within this, what ways has the shift towards data-driven decision making impacted HR?
Well, if you think about it, when you take the why away from a problem, right? If you don't really need to understand the basis of a recommendation, then you don't really need to kind of understand the domain as much, right? So in a way, it decreases the importance of, let's say, centers of excellence or of, let's say, a learning expert or maybe even of a recruiter, because it might say, we don't even need your expertise anymore because we can mine from the data what people should be learning, and we can mine from the data what type of candidate we should be approaching. And that type of expertise isn't as important as it might be in the past. That being said, right, the flip side of it is that for these kind of predictive tools to actually work, they need really good data to work on. And creating that really good data is really hard, right? It's actually not that hard to train a model or deploy a model. What's hard is to have good enough data that model is actually really going to work for you, right? Or even has valid predictions. So what this means is we need in HR people who can really define good, solid processes that really measure and capture the right information and do it so in a really consistent way. And only then can you really hope that these new fancy tools are really going to work for you. Because if your data is crap, none of these tools really function effectively. So it basically means that people in HR need to have a more techie mindset oftentimes, and perhaps need to be a bit more rigorous with regards to how processes need to be executed than was really necessary in the past.
So it's more like evidence-based decision making. So it's what the data you get is more evidence-based. So then I guess it's more fairer for businesses to make decisions, and also I guess minimises biasness.
Well, yeah, but I guess what I would say is you can't do evidence-based decision making without good evidence, and having the discipline to create good evidence is tough, right? That's a hard thing to do, and therefore we have to be mindful about how we do it, right? If you want to make decisions, for example, on who to hire, on what skills those people have in the system, then you better be damn sure that you've got their skills in the system, right? Do you have all their skills in the system? You might have the skills you know about, but do you have all of them? Maybe, maybe not. Do you know what level of skill they have in the system? Like that, maybe they told you I have this skill, but do they really have that skill? Are they an expert in that skill? Are they not an expert in that skill? How do you measure their level of expertise in the skill? So, automation is great, but of course, it only depends on all of these pieces of information that you are somehow capturing and measuring to put in the system to make these decisions. And of course, if you aren't doing that right, then you're setting yourself up for unfair decisions. You're setting yourself up for bias and potential lawsuits at the end of the day if you're not if you don't have a proper basis for the decisions you're making.
I guess that tends to lead to like companies' approaches to hiring and also retention within businesses. So how has sort of the HR analytics changed the way organizations approach sort of talent acquisition and retention?
Yeah, I mean, you probably know better than me, Ben, being in this space particularly, but there's a lot of tools around talent acquisition, right? And as you know, that's often one of the most strategic areas in HR, right? Making sure you're really filling your company with the right types of people. There's a lot of, let's say, AI tools, analytics tools. I'm using AI and analytics a little bit interchangeably here, but there's a lot of tools in that space to help with recruiting, right? Tools which help recruiters find potential candidates on LinkedIn, for example, or tools that do CV screening for you and try to find good matches on a CV. Certainly in like mass hiring situations, now you can really do some interesting work on figuring out the exact right profile for a mass hiring position. So I'm thinking of call center agents or such, and you can really analyze what were the attributes of the people who I hired who were successful, right? And then go out and look for more of those types of people. And actually, I've had a lot of success with that type of analysis. Also, on the development side, you can really look at pipelines and you can really analyze the flow of people through organizations and how they progress. I did some interesting work for a sales organization where there was a perception that to get great salespeople, you have to go out in the market and you have to hire salespeople from other companies, for example. But when we looked at the pipeline and we looked at the expense of bringing in external salespeople from other companies, we actually found our most successful people, or at least the people with the highest return on investment, were those who've grown organically through the organization. So, this type of analysis can really dispel some of the hunches that the management can have. And I think that's one of the best things you can do, right? When you can really challenge an assumption and prove, if you like, that there's actually better ways of doing things. Your other question was retention. On retention, again, this was kind of an early use case. You saw a lot, 10, 15 years ago, people starting to talk about predictive algorithms for if someone is going to leave the company. In my experience, the reality is it's very hard to say that this person is going to leave and that person is not going to leave, right? Without incredibly intrusive data collection, which I've never seen, by the way, I think to predict at the individual level reliably is not realistic. What you can get at is what levers we have over retention and how we can vary the chance that someone leaves or doesn't leave, right? So what I mean by that is you can say, if we cut our bonus by 10%, our attrition will go up by 1%, right? That type of thing you can analyze and you can make valid predictions on. But to say, Ben's going to leave, but if I do this one thing for Ben, he'll stay, I think that's probably unlikely to work, would be my guess. But certainly the type of analysis I'm talking about on retention, on the levers, can yield some interesting results, right? I mean, it's quite interesting to know that there is a relationship between performance systems and retention, because there should be, right? Hopefully you retain the people who you think are good performers, and the people who you don't really want to retain leave, right? So that's probably an outcome that you want, and it's good to be able to actually measure that and measure how your performance system contributes towards that. Same kind of thing with engagement. I think analytics of survey results on engagement can also yield very good results, or be used to identify problem managers and such who are drivers of disengagement within the organization, so that HR can actually act on that. That's also quite a powerful use case.
Yeah, no, I think definitely, also I'm familiar with talent acquisition side. I think it also can help out with companies, like a lot of metrics, like how long it took to hire. Because say if you had somebody leave, then you've got metrics on likelihood, how long it's going to take. And obviously, if you've got difficult to hire positions and it's a business critical role, obviously then you need to put the right solution in place to how can you speed that up. And obviously just to help, I guess, strategically plan as a business, because if it's a critical hire for your company and you've not got that in, either you're going to have to outsource that, and that's going to be an added cost. So it's definitely beneficial information there. So within, what role does HR analytics play in understanding and improving employee engagement and productivity? So it's more onto the retention side.
Yeah. As I just touched on the problem managers. I think that's an important one. You can also use analytics to spot other kinds of influences on engagement, right? So you can link engagement data with other workforce data. You can see, is there disengagement within particular roles, for example, within particular tenures or combinations thereof? Are people getting disengaged after spending a particular amount of time in particular roles or in particular areas of the company? All of these things can be analyzed, right? And what is also nice is that if you set up your analytics system the right way, you can also track how the engagement of particular individuals changes over time, or particular cohorts. So you can say, look, okay, we've got this cohort of people or this segment, and we've kind of identified that this segment of people is under-engaged. You can then target that segment with particular interventions, right, with the help of your business partners and your kind of organizational effectiveness experts. And then next year, you can go back and look at that same cohort and see, has that made a difference? So I think this is a super powerful way of actually approaching engagement problems, like making sure you're spending your resources effectively because you're targeting the right groups, but also finding out, are your programs actually worth doing, right? Or do you have the right programs? Which programs really work? I think this is a really good way to analyze, an important role analytics can play in the engagement problem. Yeah, and then
I definitely think it can add, because obviously you want to find out what if, like, John Doe is unhappy. The reason, how can you make his job more interesting? Whether it's like put him on a training platform, program, things like that. And if it, so then you can monitor the trends there, can't you?
You definitely can. I mean, I don't like to talk about working at the level of the individual, partly because it's just intrusive, right? And we have to respect people's individual privacy to talk about targeting like individuals, and of course individuals are all very different and they have personal lives and stuff going on that's nothing to do with work, and And we don't want to get into that. We don't want to measure that, and we can't do anything about those things, right? So, but yes, to your point, if we identify groups within the company that seem to have a specific type of problem, right, in relation to the workplace, then we can design programs, designed to help those groups, right? And then we can look at that same group of people, next year or whenever we next measure engagement to see the impact we've had on that group.
Yeah, no, definitely. So what, obviously, within a lot of companies we deal with, obviously a big topic is around promoting diversity and inclusion within the workplace. So how has HR analytics, I guess, helped businesses, promote it and also, share knowledge within the business?
I've worked very closely with the diversity teams wherever I've been. As a diversity team, I think it's really hard, right? It's hard because you're not always taken seriously. People can treat it a bit as tokenism, and because of that, it can be hard for the diversity teams to get traction a lot of the times. And I really think diversity is an important topic, right? And the nice thing about the diversity teams leveraging HR analytics, so they can really bring data to the table, and this really helps them drive their topic much more effectively, right? It also means the types of diversity initiatives that might be communicated externally might be like, we have so many females in our management team, for example, in our C-suite, right? Which is probably true, and this is good, but it's very kind of surface level stuff, right? You might be great at female representation in the C-suite level, but if like every level below that you're terrible, then you should probably do something about that, right? And HR analytics can really help move the needle from, let's say, beyond diversity, and I hesitate to use the word, but let's say diversity branding, where you're trying to give the appearance of being a progressive company on a particular topic, to where you're actually, for real moving the needle, like meaning you're really measuring all aspects of diversity throughout the company, through all layers of the company. You're really looking at how a diverse talent developing from the bottom through, junior management, senior management, whatever, and really look at that pipeline. So you're not like, a lot of companies, I think they have the people get the impression, oh, this isn't a diverse company, and then they say, okay, I know how to solve that. I'll go out and I'll hire some, high profile person, diverse talent. I'll bring them in at the top, and then I can talk about how diverse our leadership team is. And that's true, and that's fine, and that's something, right? But you're just kind of rearranging the deck chairs, if you like. Like, the culture of the company depends on everyone within the company, right? It's not just set by people right at the top. So for me, I think really analytics helps the diversity team to really bring transparency to diversity throughout the company at every level, and systematically build pipelines for developing talent from bottom to top. And and that's really how you change the culture that way.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So we touched on predictive analytics. That's obviously another key topic in sort of today's world. How has this impacted business? Like, how's this impact the role of companies, and how's it developed like within businesses?
Well, a little bit already. As I said before, like it's difficult because we're dealing with people, and we're potentially making consequential decisions about them, and we have to be careful, right? We have to remember there's a difference between predicting something and knowing something, right? And when we're predicting, we're just saying, it might happen, or it probably happen, or it has some percentage chance of happening, right? But that doesn't mean that we know something will happen. My son, for example, right? If it's like, I don't know, he's playing some game, right? And to win, he needs to roll 3 or more on a dice. And he thinks, well, there's 66% chance of that, so it should happen, right? And then he rolls and he gets a 1 or 2. He's like, oh, how did that happen? I'm so unlucky, right? Well, no, you were probably going to win, but you didn't, right? And there was always that chance. So there's a big difference between knowing something to be true or it being true and just kind of having a prediction.
It's like your sports team. You like your sports team as well, isn't it?
Exactly.
Sometimes you expect them to win, and then it don't go that right way.
Exactly. It's like, how could it have happened? Well, guys, there was always a chance it was going to happen. We have to remember that. And where this relates is, I guess
even more so for humans, isn't it? Really, because people go through different life experiences, and that can completely change your situation. So, and that situation is not going to be the same for next person or the next person. So it's a lot of different variables, isn't there, to take in?
Exactly. And so how do we in HR use predictive analytics in a way that's fair to the individual?
Yeah.
Right. And we have to be very careful, right? So the use cases that you see, and I've mentioned them already, right? The common ones about recommending learning, or this type of or jobs, all right? Like, these are predictions at an individual level, but the individual has full control over whether they take that prediction or not, right? It's like, it can't really hurt them, right? They can say, okay, it's just a bad prediction, but it doesn't hurt me. And I think predictive analytics in that sense it's fine, right? I think we can say ethically it's all good. And so we see that type of what I might call consumer-facing predictive analytics rolling out more and more within HR. I guess the side where, it's on the other side, right? I think the predictive cases are more like I've mentioned, where you're not exactly predicting something. I mean, if you study like a data set and you try to come up with your ideal candidate profile, right? You are basically predicting, in the sense that you're predicting that this type of person is a good candidate. And then you apply that to a person when you interview them. But I think it's still important. I think most people would still recognize it's important that when you are in the interview process, you understand that these predictions about what a perfect candidate might look like, right? That there's always space for judgment, right? And there's always space for someone to say, yeah, okay, that's maybe perfect, or that's what has worked in the past, but we always have to kind of maintain the idea that, it's only a prediction, right?
Yeah.
And there's still a place for judgment. And I think that's particularly important when the consequences are negative for the person.
Yeah, no, definitely. So within that, obviously touching base on, I guess, the challenges and limitations, what are the big factors here for sort of in the HR analytics space?
I mean, in HR analytics and in any other analytics, you'll often hear people say, they spend 90% of their time like gathering and cleaning data and 10% of their time doing it.
Yeah.
Right. And HR analytics is the same, if not even more so, a lot of the time, right? So the challenge, which never ever goes away, is the challenge for good data. And it's really difficult even to make your core HR data good. And what I mean by that is that you're hiring people on a certain day, they're moving in these certain departments in a certain way, that a promotion is a promotion and not a job change, getting your position management processes correct, that for example, if someone moves from, when someone moves out of a position, a new person moves into the position, that you don't like destroy that position and create a new position in the system, but you use the same position over time. You know, just getting that stuff right is really bloody hard, right? It's really difficult. And that's like your basic bread and butter HR admin work. Now, when we think about these new consumer products, particularly on the skills topic, designing these skills taxonomies, hard. Tagging these skills taxonomies, or creating good job descriptions for the roles in your company, harder. Creating those job descriptions with a really good, solid set of skills and attributes that job requires, even harder, right? Maintaining it over time, really difficult. Okay, and the amount of attention to detail that's required to kind of maintain these structures and keep them at a high level of quality so that all these consumer recommendation engines work properly, I think that's a big challenge.
Yeah, especially as technology is evolving constantly, and it's like technology skill sets are constantly changing, and then within that, obviously, becomes these softer skills evolve as well. So, like, you may need someone really techie, but as time evolves, especially like seen in like data engineering, might need certain skills, but then that's starting to evolve. Well, previously it was more they want heavy data skills, but even that now is more progressing more into like software type skills. So obviously to keep on top of that, and I guess be like real time, it's going to be challenging for businesses to keep pace because things are moving so quickly for everyone.
Exactly. Like even the same job, right? As you say, like even the same job, the skills required to do that job change quite quickly over time. I mean, case in point, the whole data science space. You know, when I was initially worked in data science, to do data science, you really had to be able to program. I mean, you were using Python every day and building stuff from scratch. Now there's a proliferation of kind of tools with user interfaces and low code, no code environments where people can do this type of work without being able to program, right? And the job descriptions maybe stays the same, but the skills required really change.
Yep, no, I completely agree. So is there any, I guess, like notable global trends that differ within HR analytics, or because I know obviously different countries, different cultural aspects. Is there anything like, yes, any really differences that stand out?
I mean, I've worked in the US and I've worked in Europe and in the UK and other places, but I think it's the difference between, you know, the US mindset and the European mindset when it comes to data is quite stark, is maybe too harsh a word, but there's definitely a distinct difference, right? And I think a big driver of that, obviously, with the GDPR in Europe and kind of the raising of the bar on data privacy standards, and to a certain extent, well, that caused a very strong reaction, I think, in European companies. To some extent, probably an overreaction because the GDPR maybe isn't as restrictive as people treat it as. But of course, it's a new law. Everyone's scared. They see the fines, the potential fines, and they say, we don't want to take any chances, right? So that definitely means that things in Europe, they really have to go through a rigorous process to be approved so that you can actually do them. You know, in the US, I mean, certainly 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there wasn't that problem, right? You basically, if the data was available, you used it. Now, I mean, obviously, hopefully you're doing it ethically, but there's no law. There's no law there telling you what's right, what's wrong. You know, I guess people use their own moral compass, or the companies you work for have a certain culture which keep their actions within, ethical boundaries, but there was no kind of legal oversight so much. So that was a big difference. I think, though, that over time things will move in the direction of Europe, because you do see the trend in the US, and California, of course, passed some law that was a little bit along the lines of the GDPR, and I think you'll see a progression of that type of legislation, and data privacy standards will generally rise over time, which means I think people analytics will become more, if you like, regulated.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Then I guess to round up, what do you see is the future in HR analytics? What's next?
I think it's a really hard question to answer. Firstly, I think there is a future in HR analytics. It's still a bit of a niche, but I think there are more and more companies engaged in it, or trying to do it. A simple fact of the matter is, for many companies, their employees are their biggest asset. And I mean that as more than just a catchphrase. I mean it really, that essentially a lot of companies, they don't produce anything physical, right? All they are is a collection of people with ideas and processes backed up by some technology, and therefore the people are absolutely key for the success of the company. They're also often the biggest expense of the company, right? So if you've got something which is both the most important productive lever and is your biggest expense, then logically it makes sense you pay attention to that thing, right? Like, to not pay attention to that thing would be stupid. So I think the necessity of HR analytics is therefore clear, right? The difficulty is that historically it's always been really difficult to measure productivity of white collar work. And we use proxies for it, like performance ratings, which is pretty imperfect given that there's often a fixed curve, right? So on average, the company can never improve their performance because there's a curve in place, right, which forces a certain distribution. And then, of course, engagement is kind of a proxy for productivity, but it's an imperfect one, because engagement is a driver of productivity, but it's not a measure of productivity, right? So, and I think this is why oftentimes HR analytics has kind of, it's difficult to really get the support from management, because it's difficult to prove that you're improving the productivity, or even to measure the thing that you're trying to improve, right? And that's an issue. So one trend that I see, and I'm kind of looking at interest, is the availability of data on day-to-day work. So I think a few years ago now, Microsoft, with Office 365, they launched this Microsoft Workplace Analytics platform. And that's quite an interesting product, because it basically gives you insight into how much of the day are people spending in meetings, how many emails are people exchanging, like who is talking to who. I don't know. And I feel like somewhere therein, right, there's information about how to become more productive. I haven't seen it done exactly. I don't know what the silver bullet is, but I'm pretty sure that using that information, you could figure out how to organize the company better in order to be more productive. So that's kind of an interesting space, I think.
And then, do you think, of this new way of working, the remote world, do you think that would be, like, doing analytics on that is going to be big in the future?
Yeah, I mean, exactly, right. That's a lot.
But then I guess, how do you monitor it?
That's the problem, right? It's again, there's clearly a need, or let's say an interest from the employer. There's clearly an interest from the employer to know, look, I can't see my people, like physically see them. So how do I know they're doing work, or how do I know when they are busy versus not so busy, and so on and so forth. Of course, well, one, people don't want to be watched all the time. Of course, I don't want to be watched. You don't want to be watched. No one wants to be watched. So no one probably really likes the idea of that done to themselves, and therefore, of course, they don't really want to do it to other people.
Yeah.
You got massive data privacy potential problems. So I can't see that the way it has to be done in Europe or other places is very carefully, right? And I see there's definitely a need. There's definitely the means to do it, right? Like the IT guys can probably monitor what you're doing on your computer all the time, and I guess it's pretty normal to have web filters and such, and they can go back through logs and figure out what people have been doing on their computer. So the let's say the interest from the employer is there and the means is there. So then it becomes a question of should or how you should you do that thing. I tend to think, I suppose, that over time it will be an area of interest. It's not clear to me exactly how to do it in a way that will be accepted by employees and will be, let's say, not open to being gamed. I mean, you see like people have like you can buy a mouse jiggler online, right? That like shakes your mouse every 30 minutes. So it makes it appear like you're like you're active on Teams, this kind of thing. So, yeah. Every measure has a kind of, it's not like Newton's law, right? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Yeah. And so it's really hard to effectively measure KPIs without them becoming inherently biased in the measurement, right? It's like a Schrodinger's cat thing. It's an interesting challenge. Yeah, so I don't know how it can be done, or I haven't worked on it myself, but I definitely think there is something, and probably it will develop over time.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's definitely going to be an interesting field because, like you touched on it, like people are the success of a business, and if they're looking at ways that how it, like, if they attract talent faster and keep their retention of staff as well, and like upskilling, training, that sort of thing. If they constantly look at ways to improve that, they're going to get better as a business, and the performance is going to be better, and it will have that knock-on effect. So yeah, definitely, like I say, I think it will also like filter down to smaller companies. Because I do see a lot more like the big corporates are pretty able to put the investment in because they've got more investment that can be invested there. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it has on the smaller firms as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Well, yeah, it was good to have you on the show and some interesting topics. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.